Question 1. Cost-benefit analysis shows that the U.S. Secret Service has limited resources for protective operations in the state of California. Considering the agency's mandate to safeguard national leaders and critical infrastructure, which of the following approaches to risk assessment and resource allocation would best align with professional standards and regulatory expectations for the U.S. Secret Service? Option A. Focus resources on potential threats that receive significant media attention or public concern, regardless of their assessed likelihood or direct relevance to the Secret Service's core protective mission. Option B. Prioritize resource allocation based on a comprehensive analysis of current threat intelligence, vulnerability assessments of protected persons and sites, and the potential impact of identified threats, ensuring a data-driven and proportionate response. Option C. Dedicate the majority of resources to addressing the most extreme, albeit statistically improbable, catastrophic threats to national security within California, even if it means neglecting more probable, lower-impact risks. Option D. Allocate resources primarily based on the volume of past incidents and arrests related to potential threats in specific regions of California, assuming historical patterns will accurately predict future risks. The correct answer is B. Prioritize resource allocation based on a comprehensive analysis of current threat intelligence, vulnerability assessments of protected persons and sites, and the potential impact of identified threats, ensuring a data-driven and proportionate response. Explanation. The scenario presents a classic challenge in law enforcement risk assessment, balancing resource allocation with the potential for evolving threats. Special agents must make informed decisions about where to focus their limited resources to maximize effectiveness in protecting national security interests. This requires a nuanced understanding of threat intelligence, vulnerability analysis, and the potential impact of various risks. The professional challenge lies in the inherent uncertainty of future events and the need to justify decisions to superiors and stakeholders, often under scrutiny. Careful judgment is required to avoid both overreaction and underpreparation. The best approach involves a systematic and data-driven evaluation of potential threats, considering both their likelihood and potential impact, and aligning these assessments with the U.S. Secret Service's protective and investigative mandates. This method prioritizes resources towards areas with the highest demonstrated risk and the most significant potential consequences, ensuring that protective measures are proportionate and effective. It aligns with the agency's core mission to safeguard national leaders and critical infrastructure, and its operational guidelines which emphasize intelligence-driven operations and risk-based decision-making. This approach is ethically sound, as it aims to provide the greatest security for the broadest number of people, by focusing on the most probable and impactful threats. An approach that solely relies on historical incident data without considering emerging trends or intelligence is flawed, because it can lead to a reactive rather than proactive posture. This fails to adequately address new or evolving threats that may not yet be reflected in past statistics, potentially leaving critical assets or individuals vulnerable. It also neglects the dynamic nature of threat assessment, which requires continuous adaptation. Another incorrect approach is to allocate resources based on public perception or media attention rather than objective risk assessment. This can lead to misallocation of valuable resources towards less significant threats, diverting attention and personnel from more critical areas. It is ethically problematic as it prioritizes visibility over actual security needs and can be influenced by external pressures rather than sound professional judgment. Finally, an approach that focuses exclusively on the most sensational or high-profile potential threats, regardless of their likelihood, is also professionally unacceptable. While these threats may have a high impact, if their probability is extremely low, dedicating significant resources to them can be an inefficient use of taxpayer money and may leave other, more probable threats inadequately addressed. This approach fails to achieve an optimal balance between risk mitigation and resource optimization. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with comprehensive intelligence gathering and analysis. This should be followed by a thorough vulnerability assessment of protected persons and sites. Subsequently, a risk matrix should be developed, plotting the likelihood of various threats against their potential impact. Resource allocation decisions should then be directly informed by this matrix, prioritizing mitigation strategies for high-risk, high-impact scenarios. Regular review and updating of threat assessments and resource allocation plans are crucial to maintain effectiveness in a constantly changing security landscape. Question 2. Governance review demonstrates that a U.S. Secret Service special agent is tasked with investigating potential financial fraud. The agent has received credible, but uncorroborated, intelligence suggesting that key evidence might be destroyed within 48 hours. What is the most appropriate risk assessment and mitigation approach for the agent to employ? Option A. Postpone any investigative action until further corroboration of the intelligence is obtained, to avoid acting on potentially false information. Option B. Rely solely on the received intelligence and proceed with a direct confrontation of the suspected individuals to secure the evidence. Option C. Conduct a comprehensive risk assessment to identify potential threats to evidence integrity and operational security, and develop a legally authorized plan to mitigate these risks, prioritizing constitutional protections. Option D. Immediately initiate covert surveillance of all individuals involved based on the uncorroborated intelligence to prevent any potential evidence destruction. The correct answer is C. Conduct a comprehensive risk assessment to identify potential threats to evidence integrity and operational security, and develop a legally authorized plan to mitigate these risks, prioritizing constitutional protections. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent tension between the need for timely information gathering and the imperative to adhere to established legal and ethical boundaries. Special agents must exercise sound judgment to balance investigative objectives with the protection of individual rights and the integrity of evidence. Missteps can lead to compromised investigations, legal repercussions, and damage to public trust. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a systematic approach that prioritizes legal compliance and evidence integrity. This means conducting a thorough risk assessment that identifies potential threats to an investigation, such as the risk of evidence destruction, compromise of operational security, or harm to individuals. Based on this assessment, the agent should then develop a plan that employs legally authorized methods to mitigate identified risks, ensuring all actions are supported by probable cause or reasonable suspicion as dictated by U.S. federal law, particularly the Fourth Amendment. This approach respects constitutional protections and maximizes the likelihood of admissible evidence. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves immediately initiating surveillance without a formal risk assessment or legal authorization. This bypasses critical due diligence, potentially leading to actions that violate privacy rights or are not supported by sufficient legal grounds, thereby jeopardizing the investigation and exposing the agent to disciplinary action. Another incorrect approach is to delay action indefinitely due to an overemphasis on theoretical risks, without developing a concrete mitigation strategy. This inaction can allow a threat to materialize, evidence to be lost, or a criminal enterprise to continue operating, failing the agent's duty to investigate and protect national security. A third incorrect approach is to rely solely on informal intelligence without corroboration, or a structured assessment of its reliability and potential impact. This can lead to misguided investigative efforts based on speculation rather than factual evidence, wasting resources and potentially harming innocent individuals. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a structured decision-making framework that begins with a clear understanding of the mission objectives and the legal parameters within which they must operate. This involves proactively identifying potential risks and vulnerabilities, evaluating their likelihood and impact, and then developing proportionate and legally sound strategies to address them. Continuous reevaluation of the risk landscape and adherence to established protocols are crucial for effective and ethical performance. Question 3. Cost-benefit analysis shows that the U.S. Secret Service in New York City has a finite budget for enhancing protective measures for various federal interests. Given this constraint, which approach to allocating these funds would best align with the agency's mission and federal protective mandates? Option A. Conduct a comprehensive risk assessment to identify and prioritize threats based on their likelihood and potential impact, then allocate resources to mitigate the highest priority risks. Option B. Allocate funds primarily based on the number of past security incidents at a particular location, assuming that past patterns will accurately predict future threats. Option C. Focus the majority of the budget on enhancing security for the most publicly visible federal buildings and landmarks, as these are often perceived as primary targets. Option D. Distribute the budget equally among all federal assets within the jurisdiction, ensuring no single asset is disproportionately neglected. The correct answer is A. Conduct a comprehensive risk assessment to identify and prioritize threats based on their likelihood and potential impact, then allocate resources to mitigate the highest priority risks. Explanation: the scenario presents a common challenge for U.S. Secret Service special agents, balancing resource allocation with the imperative to protect national security interests. The core of the challenge lies in making informed decisions about where to invest limited resources for maximum impact, a process that requires a nuanced understanding of threat assessment and risk management principles as applied within the U.S. federal law enforcement context. Careful judgment is required to avoid both underprotection due to insufficient investment and overprotection that could divert resources from other critical areas. The best approach involves a systematic, data-driven risk assessment that prioritizes threats based on their likelihood and potential impact, aligning with the U.S. Secret Service's mandate. This method involves identifying potential vulnerabilities, analyzing the probability of threats materializing, and evaluating the severity of consequences. Resources are then allocated to mitigate the highest priority risks. This aligns with the principles of effective law enforcement resource management and the statutory responsibilities of the Secret Service to protect national leaders, critical infrastructure, and financial systems. The U.S. Secret Service operates under various federal statutes and executive orders that mandate its protective and investigative missions, requiring a proactive and risk-informed approach to security. An approach that focuses solely on historical incident data without considering emerging threats is flawed because it can lead to a reactive rather than a proactive security posture. This fails to account for evolving methodologies of adversaries and new vulnerabilities that may not yet be reflected in past events. Such a failure could leave critical assets exposed to novel threats. An approach that prioritizes high-visibility assets regardless of their current threat level is inefficient and potentially ineffective. While high-visibility assets are important, an uncritical focus on them can divert resources from less visible but potentially more vulnerable or critical assets that pose a greater systemic risk. This misallocation of resources can undermine the overall security mission. An approach that relies exclusively on the opinions of senior leadership without a formal risk assessment process is problematic. While leadership input is valuable, decisions must be grounded in objective analysis to ensure fairness, transparency, and effectiveness. Subjective decision-making can lead to biases and may not accurately reflect the true risk landscape, potentially resulting in misallocated resources and compromised security. Professionals should employ a structured decision-making process that begins with a comprehensive threat and vulnerability assessment. This involves gathering intelligence, analyzing potential adversary capabilities and intentions, and evaluating the susceptibility of protected persons and assets. Following this, a risk matrix should be developed to quantify and prioritize risks. Resource allocation decision should then be directly tied to the outcomes of this risk assessment, with regular reviews and adjustments to account for changing threat environments. This systematic process ensures that resources are deployed strategically and effectively to achieve the U.S. Secret Service's mission. Question 4. Cost-benefit analysis shows that obtaining subscriber information from a telecommunications provider could significantly advance a critical U.S. federal investigation. Considering the legal and ethical frameworks governing U.S. federal law enforcement, what is the most appropriate and legally sound method for a U.S. Secret Service special agent to acquire this information? Option A. Obtain a subpoena duces tecum from a court without a formal application demonstrating probable cause, based on the agent's professional judgment. Option B. Initiate a formal request for subscriber information using a National Security Letter, NSL, through established interagency channels, adhering to the provisions of the Electronic Communications Privacy Act (ECPA). Option C. Task a confidential informant with gaining unauthorized access to the telecommunications provider's internal systems to retrieve the subscriber data. Option D. Directly contact the telecommunications provider's legal department and request the information informally, citing the urgency of the investigation. Correct answer is B. Initiate a formal request for subscriber information using a National Security Letter, NSL, through established interagency channels, adhering to the provisions of the Electronic Communications Privacy Act (ECPA). Explanation: scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires the special agent to balance the immediate need for information with the long-term implications of their investigative methods. The agent must consider the potential for compromising ongoing investigations, violating privacy rights, and exceeding statutory authority, all while operating within the strict legal and ethical boundaries set by U.S. federal law. Careful judgment is required to ensure that the pursuit of intelligence does not undermine the integrity of the justice system or erode public trust. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves initiating a formal request through established interagency channels, specifically leveraging the National Security Letter (NSL) process under the Electronic Communications Privacy Act (ECPA) for access to subscriber information. This approach is correct because it adheres strictly to U.S. federal law, which governs the collection of sensitive electronic data. The NSL process provides a legal framework for obtaining certain types of information without prior court approval, but it is subject to specific statutory limitations and oversight. By using this authorized legal mechanism, the agent ensures that the information is obtained lawfully, with appropriate documentation and justification, minimizing the risk of legal challenge or ethical breach. This method respects privacy rights while enabling necessary investigative actions. Incorrect approach is analysis. Initiating a direct, informal request to the telecommunications provider without any legal process or documentation is professionally unacceptable. This bypasses established legal procedures designed to protect individual privacy and prevent unauthorized access to sensitive data. Such an action could be construed as an unlawful search or seizure under the Fourth Amendment of the U.S. Constitution and would violate the principles of due process. Furthermore, it circumvents the oversight mechanisms built into the NSL process, potentially leading to misuse of authority and undermining the credibility of the Secret Service. Attempting to obtain the information through a subpoena duces tecum without demonstrating probable cause to a court is also professionally unacceptable. While subpoenas are a legal tool, they typically require a judicial order and a showing of relevance to an ongoing investigation. Circumventing the judicial process for obtaining such information, especially when a specific statutory mechanism like the NSL exists, is an overreach of authority and a violation of the separation of powers doctrine. It also fails to provide the necessary legal justification for compelling the production of records. Using a confidential informant to illicitly obtain the subscriber information from the telecommunications provider is a serious ethical and legal failure. This method relies on potentially illegal actions by a third party and introduces significant risks of evidence contamination, informant unreliability, and entrapment. It also bypasses all legal safeguards and oversight, exposing the agent and the agency to severe legal repercussions and reputational damage. This approach disregards the fundamental principles of lawful evidence collection and due process. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this situation should employ a structured decision-making process that prioritizes legal compliance and ethical conduct. First, identify the specific type of information required and the relevant U.S. federal statutes governing its acquisition. Second, assess the available legal tools, such as NSLs, subpoenas, or court orders, and determine which is most appropriate and legally permissible for the given circumstances. Third, consult with legal counsel to ensure the chosen method aligns with all applicable laws and agency policies. Fourth, meticulously document all requests and actions taken, maintaining a clear audit trail. Finally, always consider the potential impact on privacy rights and the integrity of the investigation, opting for the least intrusive lawful means to achieve investigative objectives. Question 5. Market research demonstrates a growing concern regarding the potential for sophisticated financial fraud schemes targeting critical U.S. infrastructure. As a U.S. Secret Service special agent, you are tasked with developing an initial risk assessment framework to identify and investigate these emerging threats within the United States. Which of the following approaches best aligns with U.S. federal law and Secret Service investigative protocols for this task? Option A. Implement a broad intelligence gathering strategy that casts a wide net, collecting information on any entities or individuals exhibiting characteristics commonly associated with financial fraud, without requiring specific, individualized suspicion for each data point. Option B. Focus on proactive information acquisition through any available means, prioritizing the immediate disruption of suspected fraudulent activities, even if it means bypassing standard legal procedures for warrants or subpoenas. Option C. Establish a risk assessment framework based on generalized threat indicators and statistical probabilities of fraud occurring within certain sectors, without necessarily requiring concrete evidence of specific fraudulent intent or activity. Option D. Develop a framework that prioritizes the collection of specific, articulable facts and intelligence related to potential financial fraud schemes targeting U.S. infrastructure, ensuring all investigative steps are legally authorized and adhere to established protocols for evidence gathering and privacy protection. The correct answer is D. Develop a framework that prioritizes the collection of specific, articulable facts and intelligence related to potential financial fraud schemes targeting U.S. infrastructure, ensuring all investigative steps are legally authorized and adhere to established protocols for evidence gathering and privacy protection. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent tension between the need for proactive intelligence gathering and the strict legal and ethical boundaries governing investigative actions. Special agents must balance the imperative to identify potential threats with the requirement to respect individual privacy and due process, as mandated by U.S. federal law and Secret Service policy. Missteps can lead to compromised investigations, legal challenges, and damage to public trust. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a systematic and legally compliant approach to risk assessment. This entails identifying potential threats based on credible intelligence, evaluating the likelihood and impact of those threats, and then developing mitigation strategies that adhere strictly to established legal frameworks, such as the Fourth Amendment's protection against unreasonable searches and seizures, and Secret Service directives on investigative protocols. This approach prioritizes evidence-based decision-making and ensures that all investigative actions are legally sound and ethically justifiable, minimizing the risk of procedural errors or civil rights violations. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves relying solely on generalized suspicions or broad demographic profiling without specific, articulable facts. This violates the principle of individualized suspicion required by U.S. law for initiating intrusive investigative measures. Such an approach risks discriminatory practices and can lead to the unwarranted targeting of innocent individuals, undermining the integrity of the investigative process and potentially violating constitutional rights. Another flawed approach is to prioritize the collection of information at any cost, disregarding established legal procedures for obtaining evidence, such as warrants or subpoenas. This can involve unauthorized surveillance or data acquisition, which is illegal and unethical. It not only compromises the admissibility of any gathered intelligence, but also exposes the agency to significant legal repercussions and public scrutiny. A further incorrect approach is to delay or neglect risk assessment due to perceived urgency, leading to impulsive actions based on incomplete or unverified information. While time sensitivity is a factor in security, bypassing thorough assessment can result in misallocation of resources, missed opportunities for more effective interventions, and the potential for unintended consequences that could escalate rather than mitigate a threat. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a structured risk assessment framework that begins with intelligence gathering from reliable sources. This intelligence should then be analyzed to identify specific threats, assess their potential impact and likelihood, and determine the appropriate level of investigative response. All actions must be grounded in probable cause or reasonable suspicion, as defined by U.S. law, and conducted in strict accordance with Secret Service policy and relevant federal statutes. Continuous evaluation of the evolving threat landscape and adherence to ethical guidelines are paramount. Question 6. Cost-benefit analysis shows that a newly discovered piece of intelligence regarding a potential threat to a protected individual could significantly aid an ongoing investigation, but its dissemination carries a risk of compromising sensitive operational methods. What is the most prudent course of action for a U.S. Secret Service special agent in this situation? Option A. Decide to withhold the intelligence from all parties until the full implications are definitively understood, to avoid any potential compromise. Option B. Conduct a formal, documented risk assessment to evaluate the potential benefits against the risks of compromising operational methods, and consult with relevant supervisors and legal counsel to determine the appropriate dissemination strategy. Option C. Rely on personal experience and informal discussions with peers to gauge the risk and decide on the best way to proceed with the information. Option D. Immediately share the intelligence with a small, trusted group of colleagues to gain their immediate input and assess the situation collaboratively. The correct answer is B. Conduct a formal, documented risk assessment to evaluate the potential benefits against the risks of compromising operational methods, and consult with relevant supervisors and legal counsel to determine the appropriate dissemination strategy. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires the special agent to balance the immediate need for information with the long-term implications of their actions on ongoing investigations and the integrity of evidence. The agent must exercise sound judgment to avoid compromising operational security or violating established investigative protocols. The pressure to quickly assess a situation and make a decision, while adhering to strict legal and ethical standards, is a hallmark of effective Secret Service work. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a thorough, documented assessment of the potential risks and benefits associated with any proposed action, prioritizing the preservation of evidence and the integrity of the investigation. This approach aligns with the U.S. Secret Service's mandate to protect national security and financial infrastructure, which necessitates meticulous adherence to legal procedures and investigative best practices. Specifically, it reflects the principles of due process and the chain of custody for evidence, ensuring that any information obtained is admissible and that the investigation is not jeopardized by premature or unauthorized disclosure. This methodical approach minimizes the likelihood of compromising ongoing operations or violating the rights of individuals involved. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves immediately disseminating sensitive information to a limited group of colleagues without a formal risk assessment or established protocol. This bypasses necessary checks and balances, potentially exposing the information to unauthorized individuals or leading to its misuse, thereby compromising operational security and the integrity of the investigation. Fails to consider the broader implications of information sharing and the potential for leaks or misinterpretations. Another incorrect approach is to withhold the information entirely due to uncertainty about its implications. While caution is important, complete inaction can hinder legitimate investigative progress and prevent timely responses to emerging threats. This approach fails to acknowledge the agent's responsibility to manage information effectively and to seek appropriate guidance when faced with ambiguity, potentially allowing a threat to escalate. A third incorrect approach is to rely solely on informal conversations and personal judgment to determine the appropriate course of action. This lacks the rigor and accountability required in sensitive investigations. It opens the door to bias, misjudgment, and inconsistent decision-making, undermining the systematic and evidence-based nature of Secret Service operations. Such an approach fails to create a clear record of the decision-making process, which is crucial for oversight and legal review. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this field should employ a structured decision-making framework that begins with identifying the core problem and its potential impact. This is followed by gathering all relevant information, assessing potential courses of action against established protocols and legal requirements, and then selecting the option that best mitigates risk while advancing the investigative objectives. Documentation of the assessment and the final decision is paramount for accountability and future reference. When in doubt, seeking guidance from supervisors or legal counsel is a critical step. Question 7. Compliance review shows that a U.S. Secret Service special agent is responsible for conducting a comprehensive risk assessment for an upcoming public event involving a high-profile dignitary. The agent has a pre-existing, friendly acquaintance with the dignitary's personal assistant, who has expressed concerns that a too intrusive security posture might upset the dignitary. The agent is considering how to proceed with the assessment. Which of the following approaches best aligns with U.S. Secret Service operational guidelines and ethical standards for risk assessment? Option A. Delegate the majority of the risk assessment tasks to junior agents, trusting their judgment based on their familiarity with the dignitary's usual routines. Option B. Conduct a thorough, independent risk assessment based on all available intelligence and threat data, documenting all findings and recommendations objectively, regardless of personal acquaintance or expressed preferences. Option C. Prioritize the dignitary's comfort and the personal assistant's concerns by downplaying potential threats and focusing on less intrusive security measures that are acceptable to the dignitary. Option D. Rely primarily on the personal assistant's assurances regarding the dignitary's safety and the perceived low-threat environment, minimizing extensive data collection. The correct answer is B. Conduct a thorough, independent risk assessment based on all available intelligence and threat data, documenting all findings and recommendations objectively, regardless of personal acquaintance or expressed preferences. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a U.S. Secret Service special agent by requiring them to balance the imperative of protecting national security interests with the need to conduct thorough and unbiased risk assessments. The agent must navigate potential conflicts of interest and ensure that their judgment is not unduly influenced by personal relationships or perceived pressures, which could compromise the integrity of the assessment process, and by extension, the security of protected individuals or events. Careful judgment is required to maintain objectivity and adhere strictly to established protocols. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a systematic and documented approach to risk assessment, prioritizing objective data and established threat intelligence over personal familiarity. This means meticulously gathering information from all available sources, including intelligence briefings, physical security surveys, and threat assessments from relevant agencies, and then analyzing this information against predefined criteria for potential risks. The agent must maintain a clear audit trail of their findings and the rationale behind their conclusions, ensuring that the assessment is defensible and free from bias. This aligns with the U.S. Secret Service's mandate to protect national security and public figures, which necessitates a rigorous, evidence-based methodology that is independent of personal relationships. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach involves relying heavily on personal knowledge of the individual being assessed and assuming a lower threat level due to a perceived lack of malicious intent. This is professionally unacceptable because it bypasses the critical requirement for objective threat analysis. Personal familiarity can create blind spots and lead to an underestimation of potential risks, violating the Secret Service's duty to conduct comprehensive and impartial assessments based on credible intelligence. Another incorrect approach is to prioritize the convenience or comfort of the protected individual over the thoroughness of the risk assessment. This might involve cutting corners on security measures or overlooking potential vulnerabilities because the individual expresses a preference for less intrusive security. This is ethically and regulatorily unsound, as it subordinates the paramount duty of protection to secondary considerations, potentially exposing the individual and the public to unacceptable risks. A third incorrect approach involves delegating the core risk assessment responsibilities to subordinates without adequate oversight or validation of their findings. While delegation is a necessary management tool, the ultimate responsibility for the accuracy and integrity of the risk assessment rests with the special agent. Abdicating this responsibility, even implicitly, can lead to flawed assessments due to a lack of direct oversight, potential for inconsistent application of standards, and a failure to exercise professional judgment at the highest level. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this field should employ a decision-making framework that emphasizes adherence to established protocols, objective data analysis, and continuous self-assessment for potential biases. This involves 1. Clearly defining the scope and objectives of the risk assessment based on official mandates. 2. Systematically collecting and evaluating all relevant intelligence and situational data. 3. Applying standardized risk assessment methodologies and criteria. 4. Documenting all findings, analyses, and recommendations with clear justifications. 5. Seeking peer review or supervisory consultation when uncertainties or potential conflicts arise. 6. Maintaining a commitment to impartiality and objectivity throughout the entire process. Question 8. The audit findings indicate a potential security vulnerability in the electronic storage of classified investigative notes within a U.S. Secret Service field office in New York. The vulnerability, if exploited, could allow unauthorized access to sensitive details of ongoing counterterrorism operations, Which of the following risk assessment approaches best addresses this situation? Option A. Conduct a detailed threat modeling exercise to identify potential attack vectors, assess the likelihood of exploitation based on current threat intelligence, and quantify the potential impact on ongoing investigations and national security. Option B. Focus on patching the specific software identified in the audit as having the vulnerability, without further investigation into other potential access points or data types. Option C. Classify the finding as a low-priority issue and schedule a review for the next quarterly risk assessment cycle, assuming current security protocols are sufficient. Option D. Immediately implement a blanket encryption policy for all electronic files in the office, regardless of classification level, to ensure maximum data protection. Correct answer is A. Conduct a detailed threat modeling exercise to identify potential attack vectors, assess the likelihood of exploitation based on current threat intelligence, and quantify the potential impact on ongoing investigations and national security. Explanation: the audit findings indicate a potential vulnerability in the U.S. Secret Service's handling of sensitive information related to ongoing investigations. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the imperative to protect national security and investigate threats with the equally critical need to maintain the integrity and confidentiality of sensitive data. A hasty or incomplete risk assessment could lead to either an overreaction that compromises an investigation or an underreaction that leaves critical information exposed. Careful judgment is required to identify the true nature of the risk and implement proportionate mitigation strategies. The best approach involves a comprehensive and systematic evaluation of the identified vulnerability. This entails a detailed analysis of the potential impact of the vulnerability, considering the type of information at risk, the likelihood of exploitation, and the potential consequences for ongoing investigations and national security. This approach is correct because it aligns with the U.S. Secret Service's mandate to protect national security and its inherent responsibility to safeguard sensitive information. Federal guidelines and internal directives emphasize a proactive and thorough risk management process, ensuring that decisions are data-driven and consider all relevant factors before implementing countermeasures. This methodical process allows for the prioritization of risks and the allocation of resources to address the most critical threats effectively, thereby upholding both operational effectiveness and data security. An approach that focuses solely on immediate containment, without a thorough understanding of the root cause and potential cascading effects, is professionally unacceptable. This failure stems from a lack of due diligence, potentially leading to the implementation of ineffective or overly burdensome controls that could hinder legitimate investigative activities. Another unacceptable approach is to dismiss the findings as minor without a proper assessment of the potential impact, which constitutes a dereliction of duty and a failure to adhere to risk management principles. This oversight could leave the agency exposed to significant security breaches. Furthermore, an approach that prioritizes speed over accuracy, leading to a superficial assessment, is also professionally unsound. Such haste bypasses the necessary steps for a robust risk evaluation, potentially resulting in misinformed decisions and inadequate protective measures. Professionals should employ a structured decision-making framework that begins with a clear understanding of the reported issue. This framework should include steps for information gathering, detailed risk analysis, including threat identification, vulnerability assessment, and impact analysis, evaluation of mitigation options, implementation of chosen controls, and ongoing monitoring and review. This systematic process ensures that all relevant factors are considered, leading to informed and defensible decisions that uphold the agency's mission and responsibilities. Question 9. Strategic planning requires U.S. Secret Service special agents in New York to assess potential threats to protected individuals and sites. Given limited resources and the vast amount of publicly available information, which of the following risk assessment approaches best aligns with the Secret Service's mandate and legal obligations? Option A. Systematically gather and analyze all available intelligence, corroborating information from multiple sources to identify specific, articulable facts indicating a credible threat and intent. Option B. Focus investigative efforts on individuals who express strong political opinions or belong to groups that are critical of government policies, even in the absence of any direct threat indicators. Option C. Rely on subjective impressions and general concerns about public sentiment to initiate surveillance and intelligence gathering operations. Option D. Prioritize investigations based on the sheer volume of negative or critical comments made about protected individuals on social media platforms, regardless of the author's specific intent or the context of the comments. The correct answer is A. Systematically gather and analyze all available intelligence, corroborating information from multiple sources to identify specific, articulable facts indicating a credible threat and intent. Explanation. The scenario presents a common challenge for U.S. Secret Service special agents, balancing the need for proactive threat assessment with the protection of individual liberties and the efficient allocation of limited resources. The core of the challenge lies in distinguishing credible threats from mere speculation or protected expressions, all while adhering to the legal and ethical mandates of the Secret Service. This requires a nuanced understanding of intelligence gathering, risk analysis, and the constitutional rights of citizens. The best approach involves a systematic and evidence-based assessment of potential threats. This means gathering and analyzing all available information, corroborating intelligence from multiple sources, and evaluating the credibility and intent of individuals or groups. The focus should be on identifying specific, articulable facts that suggest a genuine risk to protectees or protected sites, rather than relying on broad generalizations or unsubstantiated suspicions. This aligns with the Secret Service's mission to protect national leaders and critical infrastructure, while also respecting due process and avoiding the unwarranted intrusion into the lives of ordinary citizens. The legal framework governing the Secret Service emphasizes the need for a reasonable basis to initiate investigations or take protective measures, grounded in intelligence that points to a credible threat. An approach that focuses solely on the volume of online chatter, without a rigorous analysis of its credibility or the intent of the author, is professionally unacceptable. This can lead to misallocation of resources, unwarranted surveillance, and potential violations of privacy rights. Similarly, prioritizing the investigation of individuals based on their political affiliations or controversial opinions, without any specific threat indicators, is a clear ethical and legal failure. Such an approach risks politicizing the Secret Service's mission and undermining public trust. Furthermore, an approach that relies on intuition or gut feelings alone, without supporting factual evidence, is insufficient for justifying investigative actions. The Secret Service operates under strict legal guidelines that require objective evidence to support its operations, not subjective impressions. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with clearly defining the protective mission and the potential threats. This framework should then incorporate a structured intelligence gathering and analysis process, emphasizing the corroboration of information and the assessment of intent and capability. Legal and ethical considerations, including the protection of civil liberties, must be integrated at every stage of the assessment. Finally, decisions regarding resource allocation and investigative action should be based on a comprehensive risk assessment that prioritizes credible threats and adheres to established protocols and legal standards. Question 10. Cost-benefit analysis shows that a proposed upgrade to the U.S. Secret Service's surveillance technology for a critical protective detail in Washington, D.C. has an estimated initial purchase cost of $500,000. The projected annual maintenance and operational costs are $75,000. The agency estimates that this new technology will reduce the probability of a successful security breach by 15%. If the estimated cost of a successful breach is $10,000,000, and the protective detail is expected to operate for 5 years, which of the following approaches represents the most fiscally responsible and justifiable use of resources, adhering to federal procurement guidelines? Option A. Calculate the total cost of ownership over 5 years and compare it to the total estimated savings from the reduced risk of a breach over the same period, ensuring the net benefit is positive and significant enough to warrant the investment. Option B. Proceed with the upgrade based on the strong recommendation of the field office supervisor, who believes the technology is essential for maintaining operational readiness, without a detailed quantitative analysis of cost savings. Option C. Purchase the technology immediately due to its advanced capabilities, deferring a detailed cost-benefit analysis until after implementation to assess its effectiveness. Option D. Allocate funds for the upgrade by reallocating resources from less critical training programs, assuming the security benefits will inherently outweigh the costs without specific calculation. The correct answer is A. Calculate the total cost of ownership over 5 years and compare it to the total estimated savings from the reduced risk of a breach over the same period, ensuring the net benefit is positive and significant enough to warrant the investment. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a special agent to balance the immediate need for enhanced surveillance technology with the fiscal responsibility and accountability mandated by federal law and Secret Service policy. The decision involves a significant financial outlay, necessitating a rigorous justification that aligns with operational effectiveness and resource management. The core challenge lies in quantifying the intangible benefits of improved security and demonstrating that the proposed expenditure is a prudent use of taxpayer funds, not merely a desire for the latest equipment. The best approach involves a comprehensive cost-benefit analysis that meticulously quantifies both the costs and the anticipated benefits of the proposed surveillance technology. This includes not only the direct purchase price, but also ongoing maintenance, training, and potential integration costs. On the benefit side, it requires estimating the reduction in risk associated with enhanced detection capabilities, the potential for earlier threat identification, and the improved operational efficiency. This method is correct because it directly addresses the requirements of federal procurement regulations, such as those found in the Federal Acquisition Regulation, FAR, which mandate that agencies justify expenditures based on demonstrable value and necessity. Furthermore, it aligns with the Secret Service's internal financial stewardship principles, ensuring that resources are allocated effectively to achieve its protective and investigative missions. A thorough analysis provides a defensible rationale for the expenditure, demonstrating due diligence and accountability. An approach that focuses solely on the perceived technological superiority of the new system, without a detailed quantitative assessment of its benefits relative to its costs, is professionally unacceptable. This fails to meet the requirements of federal financial regulations that demand a clear return on investment or demonstrable improvement in mission effectiveness that justifies the expenditure. It risks misallocating funds that could be better used elsewhere or investing in technology that does not provide a proportional increase in security. Another unacceptable approach is to prioritize the immediate operational need without adequately considering the long-term financial implications. While operational readiness is paramount, neglecting to factor in the total cost of ownership, including maintenance, upgrades, and personnel training, can lead to budget overruns and strain future resources. This demonstrates a lack of foresight and responsible financial planning, which is a critical ethical and regulatory failure. Finally, an approach that relies on anecdotal evidence or the opinions of a few key personnel without objective data to support the claimed benefits is also professionally unsound. Federal agencies are required to make decisions based on evidence and data, not subjective assessments. This approach lacks the rigor necessary to justify a significant financial commitment and opens the agency to criticism regarding the responsible use of public funds. Professionals should employ a structured decision-making process that begins with clearly defining the problem or operational need. This should be followed by identifying potential solutions and then conducting a thorough, data-driven analysis of each solution, focusing on both quantitative and qualitative factors. The process must include a robust cost-benefit analysis, consideration of long-term implications, and adherence to all relevant federal regulations and agency policies. The final decision should be based on the solution that offers the greatest demonstrable value and aligns with the agency's mission and fiscal responsibilities. Question 11. The performance metrics show a significant increase in reported financial crimes targeting small businesses across California. As a U.S. Secret Service special agent, what is the most effective and ethically sound approach to assessing and prioritizing these emerging threats? Option A. Allocate resources based on recent media coverage and anecdotal reports of financial crimes affecting small businesses in California, without conducting a systematic data analysis. Option B. Conduct a comprehensive risk assessment by evaluating the potential impact, likelihood of occurrence, and vulnerability of small businesses to various financial crime typologies. Option C. Prioritize investigations based on the perceived financial standing of the targeted small businesses, dedicating more resources to those believed to be more affluent. Option D. Focus investigative resources exclusively on the financial crime categories with the highest number of reported incidents, regardless of the sophistication or severity of the underlying criminal activity. The correct answer is B. Conduct a comprehensive risk assessment by evaluating the potential impact, likelihood of occurrence, and vulnerability of small businesses to various financial crime typologies. Explanation. The performance metrics show a concerning trend in the number of reported financial crimes impacting small businesses within the state of California. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires the special agent to balance proactive threat identification with resource allocation, ensuring that investigative efforts are both effective and efficient without compromising due process or civil liberties. The agent must consider the potential for systemic vulnerabilities versus isolated incidents, and the impact of these crimes on the economic stability of the state. The best approach involves a comprehensive risk assessment that prioritizes threats based on their potential impact, likelihood of occurrence, and the vulnerability of the targeted population. This methodology aligns with the U.S. Secret Service's mandate to protect financial infrastructure and investigate financial crimes. By systematically evaluating these factors, the agent can develop targeted strategies, allocate resources judiciously, and focus investigative efforts on the most significant threats. This is ethically sound as it maximizes the agency's ability to protect the public interest and uphold the law by addressing the most pressing risks. An approach that focuses solely on the highest volume of reported incidents without considering the severity or sophistication of the crimes would be flawed. This could lead to an overemphasis on minor offenses while overlooking more damaging, albeit less frequent, criminal activities. This fails to provide a nuanced understanding of the overall risk landscape. Another incorrect approach would be to prioritize investigations based on the perceived wealth of the victims. This is ethically unacceptable as it violates the principle of equal protection under the law and the Secret Service's duty to investigate all financial crimes regardless of victim status. It also fails to consider the disproportionate impact that financial crimes can have on vulnerable populations, including small businesses. Furthermore, an approach that relies solely on anecdotal evidence or media reports without rigorous data analysis is professionally unsound. This can lead to misallocation of resources and a failure to identify the true nature and scope of the threats. It bypasses the systematic and evidence-based methodology required for effective risk assessment and threat mitigation. Professionals should employ a structured decision-making process that begins with defining the scope of the risk assessment. This involves identifying potential threats, vulnerabilities, and the potential impact of those threats. Next, data should be collected and analyzed to estimate the likelihood and impact of each identified risk. This analysis should then inform the prioritization of risks, allowing for the development of appropriate mitigation strategies and resource allocation plans. Regular review and updating of the risk assessment are crucial to adapt to evolving threat landscapes. Question 12. During the evaluation of a potential threat to financial infrastructure in New York, a special agent overhears a conversation in a public space that mentions specific, albeit vague, details about a planned disruption. The agent has no prior intelligence linking the individuals involved to any known threats. What is the most appropriate course of action for the special agent? Option A. Directly approach the individuals involved and question them about the overheard conversation to ascertain the nature of their plans. Option B. Share the overheard conversation with other agents on unrelated assignments to see if they have any corroborating intelligence. Option C. Document the overheard conversation in detail, including observations of the individuals, and immediately report it through the established chain of command to supervisory personnel and the relevant legal counsel for assessment and guidance. Option D. Disregard the overheard conversation as unsubstantiated and lacking direct evidence of criminal activity, and continue with the original mission. The correct answer is C. Document the overheard conversation in detail, including observations of the individuals, and immediately report it through the established chain of command to supervisory personnel and the relevant legal counsel for assessment and guidance. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent tension between the need for swift action to protect national security and the imperative to adhere to established investigative protocols and legal boundaries. Special agents must exercise sound judgment, balancing urgency with due process and the preservation of evidence. The core of the challenge lies in navigating potential information gaps and acting decisively without compromising the integrity of an investigation or violating individual rights. The correct approach involves meticulously documenting all observations and communications, even those that appear tangential, and then presenting this comprehensive information to the appropriate supervisory and legal authorities for guidance. This method is correct because it upholds the principles of accountability and transparency fundamental to law enforcement investigations. By creating a thorough record, agents ensure that their actions are auditable and that decisions are made collaboratively with those empowered to interpret legal statutes and agency policy. This aligns with the U.S. Secret Service's mandate to protect national security and financial infrastructure, which requires adherence to strict legal frameworks and ethical standards to maintain public trust and operational legitimacy. An incorrect approach would be to directly engage the individual based on the overheard conversation, without further corroboration or supervisory approval. This is professionally unacceptable because it bypasses established investigative procedures, potentially leading to an unwarranted intrusion into an individual's privacy or the premature compromise of a broader investigation. Acting solely on a single overheard remark, without the benefit of a comprehensive assessment of its context and reliability, risks violating Fourth Amendment protections against unreasonable searches and seizures, and could lead to the suppression of crucial evidence. Another incorrect approach would be to dismiss the overheard information as irrelevant without any attempt at verification or documentation. This is professionally unacceptable as it demonstrates a failure to exercise due diligence and could result in overlooking a genuine threat to national security or financial integrity. The Secret Service has a broad protective mission, and seemingly minor pieces of information can, when aggregated, form a critical part of an intelligence picture. A further incorrect approach would be to share the overheard information with unauthorized personnel, outside of the established chain of command or investigative team. This is professionally unacceptable due to the sensitive nature of the information and the potential for it to be mishandled, misinterpreted, or used for purposes other than legitimate investigation, thereby compromising operational security and potentially violating privacy laws. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a structured approach. First, assess the immediate threat level. Second, meticulously document all observations and communications. Third, consult with supervisors and legal counsel to determine the appropriate course of action based on established protocols and legal guidance. And fourth, act only after receiving explicit authorization and within the defined parameters of that authorization. Question 13. What factors determine the appropriate investigative response when a U.S. Secret Service special agent observes an individual exhibiting suspicious behavior in close proximity to a protectee in Washington, D.C.? Option A. The agent's personal intuition regarding the individual's intent, without requiring concrete observable behaviors or legal justification for intervention. Option B. The agent's immediate assessment of the threat level to the protectee, coupled with the presence of observable indicators that establish reasonable suspicion or probable cause for further investigation, while ensuring the protectee's safety is paramount. Option C. The immediate apprehension of the individual based on the mere presence of the individual near the protectee, regardless of their specific actions. Option D. The agent's decision to solely rely on the protectee's subjective feeling of unease to justify any investigative action. The correct answer is B. The agent's immediate assessment of the threat level to the protectee, coupled with the presence of observable indicators that establish reasonable suspicion or probable cause for further investigation, while ensuring the protectee's safety is paramount. Explanation. The scenario presents a common challenge for U.S. Secret Service special agents, balancing the need for swift action to protect a protectee with the requirement to adhere to established investigative protocols and legal boundaries. The professional challenge lies in the inherent tension between immediate security concerns and the meticulous, evidence-based approach mandated by law enforcement procedures. A special agent must exercise sound judgment, recognizing that a premature or improperly executed action could compromise the investigation, violate an individual's rights, or even create a greater security risk. The correct approach involves a systematic and legally sound response that prioritizes the protectee's safety while initiating a thorough evidence-gathering process. This means immediately securing the protectee and the immediate vicinity to neutralize any perceived threat. Simultaneously, the agent must begin documenting observations and securing any potential evidence without contaminating it or violating privacy rights. This aligns with the U.S. Secret Service's mandate to protect national leaders and critical infrastructure, which is underpinned by federal law and departmental policy emphasizing lawful investigative practices. The agent's actions must be guided by probable cause and a clear understanding of the legal standards for search, seizure, and detention, ensuring that any subsequent investigative steps are admissible in court and uphold constitutional principles. An incorrect approach would be to immediately detain or apprehend the individual based solely on suspicion, without further corroboration or a clear articulation of probable cause. This could lead to an unlawful detention, violating Fourth Amendment protections against unreasonable searches and seizures. Another incorrect approach would be to ignore the potential threat and fail to take immediate protective measures for the protectee, thereby neglecting the primary duty of the Secret Service. Furthermore, an agent who seizes potential evidence without proper documentation or a clear chain of custody risks rendering that evidence inadmissible, undermining the integrity of any potential investigation. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with threat assessment and immediate protective actions. This should be followed by a rapid evaluation of the situation against established legal standards for probable cause and reasonable suspicion. Agents must then proceed with evidence collection and documentation in a manner that preserves its integrity and adheres to all legal requirements. Continuous communication with supervisors and legal counsel, when appropriate, is crucial to ensure that actions remain within legal and policy boundaries. Question 14. The risk matrix shows a moderate likelihood of a moderate impact event related to the compromise of sensitive financial data during a cross-border investigation involving a U.S. financial institution. As a U.S. Secret Service special agent, what is the most appropriate course of action to ensure the integrity of the investigation and compliance with U.S. federal law and international data protection principles when requesting and handling this data from a foreign entity? Option A. Proceed with the data request based on the urgency of the investigation, relying on informal assurances from the foreign entity regarding data security and privacy, and document the request verbally with the foreign counterpart. Option B. Share the requested data immediately through readily available communication channels to expedite the investigation, assuming the foreign entity will handle its security appropriately. Option C. Initiate a formal request for the data, but delay the transmission of any collected information until a comprehensive review of the foreign jurisdiction's data protection laws is completed, even if it significantly impedes the investigation. Option D. Obtain all necessary legal authorizations, including warrants or court orders where applicable, for the transfer and handling of the data, ensure secure and encrypted transmission methods are used, and meticulously document all chain of custody procedures in accordance with U.S. federal statutes and international agreements. The correct answer is D. Obtain all necessary legal authorizations, including warrants or court orders where applicable, for the transfer and handling of the data, ensure secure and encrypted transmission methods are used, and meticulously document all chain of custody procedures in accordance with U.S. federal statutes and international agreements. Explanation. The risk matrix shows a moderate likelihood of a moderate impact event related to the compromise of sensitive financial data during a cross-border investigation involving a U.S. financial institution. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires special agents to balance the urgency of an ongoing investigation with the strict legal and ethical obligations surrounding data privacy and international cooperation. Failure to adhere to proper protocols could jeopardize the investigation, lead to legal repercussions for the U.S. government, and damage diplomatic relations. The best approach involves meticulously documenting all data handling procedures, obtaining necessary legal authorizations for data transfer, and ensuring compliance with both U.S. federal laws, such as the Stored Communications Act and relevant financial regulations, and the data protection laws of the foreign jurisdiction. This includes establishing clear chain of custody protocols and employing secure, encrypted methods for data transmission. This approach is correct because it prioritizes legal compliance and data integrity, which are fundamental to the U.S. Secret Service's mission and its standing in international law enforcement. It demonstrates a commitment to due process and respects the sovereignty and legal frameworks of partner nations, thereby safeguarding the evidence and the investigation's admissibility. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with data sharing without explicit legal authorization, relying on informal agreements or perceived urgency. This fails to meet the requirements of statutes like the Stored Communications Act, which govern the disclosure of electronic communications content, and could violate international mutual legal assistance treaties or agreements. Another incorrect approach is to delay the investigation significantly by overcomplicating the authorization process, thereby risking the destruction or alteration of evidence. This demonstrates poor judgment in balancing investigative needs with legal constraints. Finally, sharing data through unsecured channels or without proper encryption, even with authorization, constitutes a severe breach of data security protocols and ethical responsibilities, potentially exposing sensitive information and compromising the investigation. Professionals should employ a structured decision-making process that begins with identifying all applicable legal and regulatory requirements. This involves consulting with legal counsel to understand the specific mandates of U.S. federal law and any relevant international agreements. Next, agents must assess the risks associated with different data handling methods, considering both investigative effectiveness and compliance. Finally, they should select the most legally sound and secure method, ensuring all steps are thoroughly documented and authorized. Question 15. Market research demonstrates that a significant increase in cyber threats targeting critical infrastructure in the United States has been observed. As a U.S. Secret Service special agent, you receive an anonymous tip suggesting that a specific federal agency, which holds sensitive data related to these threats, may have an internal vulnerability being exploited. You need to obtain information from this agency to assess the validity of the tip and the potential scope of the threat. What is the most appropriate course of action to obtain this information? Option A. Attempt to gain direct access to the target agency's internal computer systems to search for evidence of the alleged vulnerability based on the urgency of the threat. Option B. Initiate a formal interagency request for information through established protocols, referencing the anonymous tip and outlining the need for data relevant to potential cyber threats to critical infrastructure, adhering to all relevant U.S. federal laws and agency MOUs. Option C. Contact an individual within the target agency who you know casually and ask them to discreetly provide any information they might have regarding internal security issues. Option D. Immediately confront a supervisor within the target agency with the anonymous tip and demand access to their systems to investigate the alleged exploitation. The correct answer is B. Initiate a formal interagency request for information through established protocols, referencing the anonymous tip and outlining the need for data relevant to potential cyber threats to critical infrastructure, adhering to all relevant U.S. federal laws and agency MOUs. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent tension between the need for swift information gathering and the strict adherence to legal and ethical boundaries governing investigative procedures. Special agents must exercise sound judgment to balance operational effectiveness with the protection of individual rights and the integrity of evidence. The potential for misinterpretation of information or overreach in investigative tactics can have severe consequences, including compromising investigations and damaging public trust. The best approach involves a systematic and legally compliant method of information acquisition. This entails initiating a formal request for information through established interagency channels, specifically leveraging the Memoranda of Understanding (MOU) or similar intergovernmental agreements that govern the sharing of sensitive data between federal agencies. This method ensures that the information is obtained with the proper authorization, documented, and within the legal framework established by U.S. federal law, such as the Privacy Act of 1974 and relevant agency policies. This process respects jurisdictional boundaries and data privacy regulations, ensuring that the gathered intelligence is admissible and ethically obtained. An approach that involves directly accessing the agency's internal systems without a formal request or proper authorization is professionally unacceptable. This bypasses established protocols and could violate the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, CFA, and internal agency security policies, leading to disciplinary action and potentially criminal charges. It also undermines the principle of interagency cooperation and trust. Another unacceptable approach is to rely on informal, unverified tips from individuals within the target agency without corroboration or proper vetting. While such information might seem valuable, acting solely on it without following established investigative procedures risks acting on misinformation, violating privacy, and compromising the integrity of the investigation. It fails to meet the standard of probable cause or reasonable suspicion required for further investigative steps. Finally, attempting to coerce or pressure an individual within the target agency to provide information outside of official channels is unethical and potentially illegal. This could constitute obstruction of justice or witness tampering, depending on the specifics, and would severely jeopardize the investigation and the agent's career. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes legal compliance, ethical conduct, and procedural integrity. This involves understanding the relevant statutes and agency policies, meticulously documenting all investigative steps, and seeking guidance from legal counsel or supervisors when faced with ambiguous situations. The focus should always be on obtaining information through legitimate and authorized means, ensuring that the investigative process is both effective and lawful. Question 16. System analysis indicates a U.S. Secret Service special agent, while conducting routine protective surveillance in Washington, D.C., observes an individual exhibiting highly unusual behavior near a protected facility. The individual appears to be discreetly observing security measures and making notes. The agent has a strong suspicion the individual may be casing the facility for a potential threat, but lacks concrete evidence to establish probable cause for an arrest or search. What is the most appropriate course of action for the agent to take? Option A. Immediately cease any direct interaction or surveillance that could be construed as intrusive, and initiate the process to obtain a warrant or other legal authorization based on the observed suspicious activity and the need for further investigation. Option B. Continue to observe the individual closely and engage in direct questioning to elicit information about their activities, citing the protective nature of the assignment as justification for the inquiry. Option C. Discreetly follow the individual to gather more information, hoping they will commit an overt act that provides probable cause for an arrest or search. Option D. Share the observations with other law enforcement agencies immediately, requesting they conduct a stop and frisk based on the agent's suspicion. The correct answer is A. Immediately cease any direct interaction or surveillance that could be construed as intrusive, and initiate the process to obtain a warrant or other legal authorization based on the observed suspicious activity and the need for further investigation. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge rooted in the U.S. Secret Service's dual mandate, protection and investigation. Agents are entrusted with sensitive information and the authority to act, but these powers are circumscribed by strict legal and ethical boundaries. The challenge lies in balancing the immediate need to gather information that could prevent a crime with the imperative to uphold constitutional rights and agency policy, particularly concerning the Fourth Amendment's protection against unreasonable searches and seizures. The agent must exercise sound judgment, recognizing that expediency cannot override legality. The best approach involves immediately ceasing any intrusive questioning or surveillance that lacks a legal basis, and instead initiating the formal process for obtaining the necessary legal authorization. This means recognizing the limitations of their current authority and understanding that further action requires a warrant or other judicially sanctioned means. This approach is correct because it prioritizes adherence to the U.S. Constitution, specifically the Fourth Amendment, and aligns with U.S. Secret Service policy regarding lawful investigative practices. By seeking a warrant, the agent ensures that any subsequent investigative steps are conducted with judicial oversight, thereby protecting individual rights and the integrity of the investigation. This demonstrates a commitment to due process and the rule of law, which are foundational to the agency's mission. An incorrect approach would be to continue questioning the individual without probable cause or a warrant, relying on the hope that they might reveal incriminating information. This directly violates the Fourth Amendment's prohibition against unreasonable searches and seizures, and could lead to the suppression of any evidence obtained, jeopardizing the investigation and potentially leading to disciplinary action. Another incorrect approach would be to use the individual's perceived nervousness or evasiveness as justification for further intrusive actions, without concrete evidence of criminal activity. This relies on subjective interpretation rather than objective facts, which is insufficient for establishing probable cause. Finally, an incorrect approach would be to share the limited, uncorroborated information with other agencies without proper authorization or a clear investigative need, potentially violating privacy laws and agency protocols. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with identifying the legal and ethical parameters of their authority. When faced with a situation where those parameters might be exceeded, the next step is to pause and assess the available information against established legal standards, such as probable cause or reasonable suspicion. If the threshold for further action is not met, the professional must then consider lawful alternatives, which may include seeking legal counsel, obtaining appropriate warrants, or ceasing the interaction until legal authorization is secured. This systematic approach ensures that actions are always grounded in legality and ethical conduct, safeguarding both the investigation and the rights of individuals. Question 17. System analysis indicates that a U.S. Secret Service special agent, while conducting an investigation in Washington, D.C., develops a close personal friendship with an individual who has provided valuable information as a confidential source. The agent believes their professional judgment remains unaffected by this developing personal connection. What is the most ethically sound and professionally responsible course of action for the special agent to take? Option A. Continue the relationship discreetly, believing personal feelings do not impact professional objectivity. Option B. Immediately report the developing personal relationship to their direct supervisor and relevant investigative unit leadership. Option C. Abruptly cease all contact with the source without explanation to avoid any appearance of impropriety. Option D. Leverage the personal relationship to gather additional, non-investigative information that might indirectly benefit the agency. The correct answer is B. Immediately report the developing personal relationship to their direct supervisor and relevant investigative unit leadership. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a special agent's duty to uphold the law and protect national security and the personal relationship with a source. The agent must navigate the potential for compromised objectivity, the risk of inadvertently disclosing sensitive information, and the ethical imperative to maintain the integrity of investigations. Careful judgment is required to ensure that personal feelings do not impede the agent's official responsibilities or create a perception of impropriety. The best professional approach involves immediately and transparently reporting the developing personal relationship to the appropriate supervisory channels. This action is correct because it adheres to the U.S. Secret Service's strict ethical guidelines and directives concerning conduct and conflicts of interest. By disclosing the relationship, the agent allows for an objective assessment by superiors regarding potential impacts on the investigation and the source's reliability. This proactive reporting ensures that appropriate measures can be taken, such as reassigning the agent or implementing enhanced oversight, maintain the integrity of the investigation, and prevent any appearance of impropriety or compromise. This aligns with the fundamental principle of maintaining public trust and the agency's commitment to impartiality. An incorrect approach would be to continue the relationship without disclosure, rationalizing that it does not affect the agent's judgment. This is ethically unacceptable because it violates the duty of transparency and creates a significant conflict of interest. The agent's objectivity is inherently compromised, even if they believe otherwise, and the potential for information leakage or preferential treatment, however unintentional, is high. This failure to report undermines the investigative process and erodes trust within the agency. Another incorrect approach would be to abruptly terminate all contact with the source without any explanation or reporting. While seemingly an attempt to resolve the conflict, this action is problematic because it lacks transparency and could raise suspicions or lead to unintended consequences with the source, potentially jeopardizing ongoing intelligence gathering. It also fails to involve the necessary supervisory oversight to manage the situation appropriately. Finally, an incorrect approach would be to subtly use the personal relationship to gain additional information beyond the scope of the official investigation, believing it would benefit the agency. This is a severe ethical and regulatory violation. It constitutes an abuse of the agent's position and the trust placed in them, blurring the lines between personal interaction and official duty, and potentially leading to the collection of inadmissible evidence or the compromise of sensitive operational methods. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a clear understanding of agency policy on conflicts of interest and personal relationships. Agents should regularly assess their interactions for any potential ethical conflicts. When a potential conflict arises, the immediate step should be to identify the nature of the conflict, consult relevant agency regulations and ethical codes, and then report the situation to their supervisor promptly and fully. This ensures that the agency can provide guidance and implement necessary safeguards to protect the integrity of its operations and maintain public confidence. Question 18. The control framework reveals that a U.S. Secret Service special agent in Washington, D.C. has recently discovered that a close family member is a person of interest in an ongoing financial crimes investigation they are assigned to. What is the most ethically sound and procedurally correct course of action for the special agent? Option A. Immediately report the potential conflict of interest to their direct supervisor and request to be recused from any aspect of the investigation involving the family member. Option B. Discuss the investigation with the family member to understand their involvement and advise them on how to cooperate with the Secret Service. Option C. Discreetly alter the investigative focus to avoid areas that might directly implicate the family member, while continuing to participate in the broader investigation. Option D. Continue with the investigation, relying on their personal integrity to remain impartial and avoid any undue influence from the family relationship. The correct answer is A. Immediately report the potential conflict of interest to their direct supervisor and request to be recused from any aspect of the investigation involving the family member. Explanation. The control framework reveals a situation where a special agent's personal relationships could potentially influence their professional judgment and compromise the integrity of an investigation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it pits personal loyalty against the unwavering duty to uphold the law and protect national security, which are paramount for the U.S. Secret Service. The agent must navigate a complex ethical landscape where perceived favoritism or bias could erode public trust and undermine the agency's mission. Careful judgment is required to ensure that all actions are taken with impartiality and in strict adherence to established protocols. The best professional approach involves immediately and transparently reporting the potential conflict of interest to the appropriate supervisory authority. This approach is correct because it upholds the U.S. Secret Service's strict ethical standards and directives concerning conflicts of interest. By proactively disclosing the relationship, the agent demonstrates integrity and allows the agency to implement necessary measures, such as recusal from specific aspects of the investigation or reassignment, to maintain objectivity and prevent any appearance of impropriety. This aligns with the core principles of law enforcement ethics, emphasizing accountability and the avoidance of even the appearance of bias. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with the investigation without disclosing the relationship, hoping to maintain objectivity through personal resolve. This is professionally unacceptable because it violates the fundamental ethical obligation to avoid conflicts of interest and creates a significant risk of actual or perceived bias. Even if the agent believes they can remain impartial, the mere existence of the undisclosed relationship could later be used to question the validity of their findings or actions, thereby compromising the investigation and the agency's reputation. Another incorrect approach would be to subtly steer the investigation away from areas that might directly implicate the relative, believing this is a discreet way to manage the conflict. This is ethically flawed as it constitutes a form of investigative manipulation, undermining the integrity of the investigative process. It prioritizes personal comfort over the pursuit of truth and justice, which is antithetical to the duties of a special agent. Finally, an incorrect approach would be to confide in the relative about the investigation and seek their advice on how to proceed. This is a severe ethical breach, as it involves compromising sensitive law enforcement information and potentially colluding with a subject or someone closely connected to a subject of an investigation. It directly violates the duty of confidentiality and jeopardizes the security of the investigation and the agency. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes transparency, adherence to policy, and the preservation of integrity. When faced with a potential conflict of interest, the first step should always be to identify the conflict, assess its potential impact, and then report it to supervisors according to established agency procedures. This proactive disclosure allows for informed decisions to be made regarding recusal or other mitigation strategies, ensuring that professional duties are always met with impartiality and without compromise. Question 19. Stakeholder feedback indicates a U.S. Secret Service special agent, while off-duty and in a personal capacity, observes an individual they recognize from previous, unrelated investigations engaging in what appears to be a clandestine exchange of what could be counterfeit currency in a public park in Washington, D.C. The agent is not in uniform and is not actively on assignment. What is the most appropriate course of action for the special agent? Option A. Approach the individual directly to ascertain the nature of the exchange, citing their authority as a Secret Service special agent to gather more information before deciding on further action. Option B. Make a mental note of the observed activity and the individual's identity, and decide to report it later if the activity appears to escalate or if the individual is encountered again during official duty. Option C. Attempt to gather more photographic or video evidence of the exchange using their personal mobile device before disengaging and reporting to ensure a stronger case. Option D. Immediately and discreetly disengage from the situation and proceed to the nearest secure location to file a formal report detailing the observed activity and the individual's identity to the appropriate Secret Service field office or supervisory agent. The correct answer is D. Immediately and discreetly disengage from the situation and proceed to the nearest secure location to file a formal report detailing the observed activity and the individual's identity to the appropriate Secret Service field office or supervisory agent. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a special agent's duty to uphold the law and the potential for personal relationships to influence judgment. The need for absolute impartiality and adherence to investigative protocols is paramount when dealing with potential criminal activity, especially when it involves individuals known to the agent. The U.S. Secret Service operates under strict ethical guidelines and federal regulations that mandate reporting of all suspected criminal activity, regardless of personal connections. Failure to do so can compromise investigations, erode public trust, and lead to disciplinary action, including potential criminal charges for obstruction of justice. The best approach involves immediately and formally reporting the observed suspicious activity to the appropriate investigative channels. This upholds the agent's oath to enforce federal law and the Secret Service's mandate to protect national security and financial infrastructure. By initiating a formal report, the agent ensures that the matter is handled objectively by the proper authorities, free from personal bias. This aligns with the U.S. Department of Justice's principles of federal prosecution and the U.S. Secret Service's own internal directives on reporting and investigative integrity. An approach that involves delaying the report to gather more personal information is ethically flawed because it prioritizes personal investigation over official protocol and potentially allows criminal activity to continue unaddressed. This could be construed as an attempt to manage the situation outside of established procedures, which undermines the integrity of the investigative process. Another incorrect approach, that of confronting the individual directly without official sanction, is problematic as it could alert the subject, lead to destruction of evidence, or even place the agent in a compromised or dangerous situation, violating established investigative safety and procedural guidelines. Finally, ignoring the activity altogether represents a dereliction of duty, a direct violation of federal law enforcement obligations, and the core mission of the Secret Service. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes adherence to legal and ethical mandates above personal considerations. This involves recognizing potential conflicts of interest, understanding the relevant regulatory framework, in this case, federal statutes and Secret Service policy, and taking immediate, appropriate action to report and escalate the matter through official channels. The guiding principle should always be the preservation of justice and the integrity of the investigative process. Question 20. System analysis indicates a confidential informant has provided valuable intelligence leading to the disruption of a counterfeiting operation in New York. The informant is requesting compensation for their assistance. The informant has proposed two options: a flat fee of $5,000 for any useful information they provide, or a 10% commission on any fines or asset forfeitures directly resulting from the intelligence they supply. As the special agent in charge of the investigation, you need to determine the most appropriate and legally sound method for compensating the informant, considering the U.S. Secret Service's operational guidelines and federal law enforcement ethics. If you were to offer a payment based on documented expenses, and the informant incurred $1,500 in verifiable travel and communication costs to provide the information, what would be the total amount paid to the informant under this justifiable expense reimbursement model? Option A, $1,500. Option B, $5,000. Option C, $0, as the informant should not be compensated for providing information. Option D, $500, representing 10% of an estimated $5,000 in potential fines. The correct answer is A, $1,500. Explanation: scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between the need for timely information gathering and the strict adherence to legal and ethical boundaries concerning the use of informants and the handling of potentially inadmissible evidence. Special agents must balance operational effectiveness with the imperative to uphold the integrity of investigations and avoid compromising future prosecutions. The financial incentive, while seemingly a tool for intelligence gathering, introduces a significant ethical and legal risk if not managed with extreme caution and transparency. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves meticulously documenting all interactions and financial disbursements related to informants, ensuring that any payments are for legitimate expenses incurred in providing information, e.g., travel, communication costs, and not for the information itself or for illegal acts. This approach aligns with the U.S. Secret Service's internal guidelines and federal law enforcement standards that require transparency, accountability, and the avoidance of creating incentives for false or fabricated information. Specifically, payments should be structured to reimburse actual, documented expenses, thereby minimizing the risk of entrapment or the creation of a financial dependency that could compromise an informant's reliability or lead to illegal activities. The agent must also ensure that the informant's compensation is reasonable and proportionate to the expenses incurred, avoiding any appearance of impropriety or quid pro quo for specific outcomes. This meticulous record-keeping and adherence to expense reimbursement principles are crucial for maintaining the admissibility of any evidence derived from the informant and for upholding the agent's ethical obligations. Correct approach is analysis. Offering a flat fee for any useful information creates a direct financial incentive for the informant to fabricate or exaggerate information to secure payment, potentially leading to the collection of unreliable intelligence and the initiation of baseless investigations. This approach violates ethical principles by introducing a bias in the information-gathering process and could be construed as an attempt to induce false testimony, which is illegal and undermines the integrity of law enforcement. Furthermore, it bypasses the established procedures for documenting and reimbursing informant expenses, increasing the risk of financial impropriety and potential legal challenges to evidence. Providing a percentage of any fines or asset forfeiture resulting from the information supplied is highly problematic. This creates a direct financial stake for the informant in the outcome of a prosecution or civil action, which can be seen as a form of contingent fee arrangement for informants. Such arrangements are generally prohibited or heavily scrutinized in law enforcement because they can incentivize informants to manipulate evidence, pressure individuals, or even engage in illegal activities to ensure a conviction or forfeiture, thereby compromising the fairness of the justice system. This approach also introduces a significant conflict of interest and could lead to the suppression of evidence if challenged in court. Accepting the informant's request for a payment without any documentation or justification, simply to maintain goodwill, is a severe ethical and procedural lapse. This lack of accountability opens the door to misuse of funds, potential bribery, and the creation of a situation where the informant feels entitled to payments regardless of the quality or veracity of the information provided. It fails to establish a clear, defensible record of expenditures, making it impossible to justify the payment if audited or challenged, and it erodes the professional standards of transparency and accountability expected of a special agent. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a structured decision-making process that prioritizes legal compliance and ethical conduct. This involves 1. Identifying the core objective, gathering intelligence. 2. Recognizing potential risks, financial impropriety, compromised evidence, ethical breaches. 3. Consulting relevant policies and regulations, U.S. Secret Service guidelines on informant management, federal laws regarding evidence and compensation. 4. Developing a plan that mitigates risks, such as focusing on expense reimbursement rather than direct payment for information. 5. Maintaining meticulous documentation throughout the process. 6. Seeking supervisory approval for any significant financial arrangements or deviations from standard procedures.